This is the ultimate camera shootout of the older Samsung Galaxy S23 and the newer Samsung Galaxy S24. Can you spot the difference, and is it time to upgrade? Let the battle begin. Welcome to the first Galaxy S24 comparison, and we're diving straight to the most formidable competition, which is last year's Galaxy S23, because it goes head-to-head with the video resolution, stabilization, and that perfect triple camera setup of ultra-wide and the native optical zoom. Today we're testing both indoors and outdoors location. We're covering all the scenarios as much as possible. We're taking a look at the colors of the sky, highlights, and strong light source. We're also utilizing all three sensors from the ultra-wide, and telephoto. All shots are taken in auto mode, so everything is shot by default out of the box. Let's begin our image test with color profile and saturation, and I can tell you honestly that there's a big difference between the two, to a point that I was asking myself if people will feel the upgrade from the last year's S23, which I feel they do. The older Samsung Galaxy S23 is more saturated or vivid than S24. The colors are a little bit brighter too, from the yellows, blue, pink, and even the darker colors like black and purple. The sky and the snow are bluer than S24, and I feel like the processing is too much. You can always turn Scene Optimizer off for a more natural looking photo. Also, the white balance is warmer. You would see this on the colors of the lights and floors in most cases. While the new Samsung Galaxy S24 has improvements on the image quality, the colors are a little bit toned down compared to last year's S23. I feel like there's a little bit of shift from iPhone-like colors to pixel color science. The white balance is on the neutral side, and I feel like Samsung dropped the over-sharpened looking image of last generation. At one point, I thought the image coming from S24 is soft, but when I pixel peep, I noticed that they're not over-sharpening the photos as much like the previous generation. The contrast is stronger, so you would see that the shadows are being crushed, and let the strong light source to be exposed a little bit, not overly exposed but enough to highlight that it is glowing. Looking quickly on the specification, I think they're rocking identical hardware. They have 50 megapixel main with 1/1.56-inch sensor, with dual face detection autofocus and OIS, with the same 10 megapixel telephoto with face detection autofocus and OIS, and a 3x optical zoom, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide with super steady video. The rear camera can shoot 8K at 24 and 30 FPS with stereo sound recording and gyro EIS. While the selfie camera also have the same sensor at 12 megapixel f2.2 with dual face detection autofocus that can shoot up to 4K 60 FPS. I think the shift is more on the color side, the scene optimization. Again, I feel like most of the changes today are coming from the software side. There are numbers of blind tests online, and the consistent winner is Pixel phones, so I'm not sure if Samsung is listening and actually tweaking their color science more in favor of pixel looking colors. I will test Galaxy S24 with Pixel 8 to see how close they are, but honestly, without knowing their model and brand, I would be happy owning any of these two phones. I still feel that the older S23 is better looking if you wanted to post the images directly to social media without editing. And for Galaxy S24, I feel like they cater most of those people with preference, the majority of the consumer who voted for pixel colors as champs. And looking at all three sensors from the ultra-wide, and telephoto, colors are consistent. I just noticed that the white balance on the 3x optical zoom of S24 is a little bit warmer than S23. This is the older Samsung Galaxy S23 in 8K 30 FPS. We will also have Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra in our channel. The shipment of that phone is late. I don't know if the reason is the color, because we only bought the online exclusive color. But once the phone is here, we will compare them with the flagship phone, the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the Pixel 8 Pro, so stay tuned. Let's talk about portrait mode, and these two phones may have two of the most well-liked portrait shots. Well, I took a survey and asked my family and friends, and they say they like the portrait images that's coming out of Samsung phones. I also showed them the images coming out of Galaxy S23 and S24, and some of them didn't really notice any difference, because I don't feel there's a whole lot, especially on the hardware. They have the same sensors. But the changes or shift is coming from the skin tone. You would see that it's less filtered on Galaxy S24. There's also less contrast on the newer Samsung flagship phone, and the colors are a little bit muted. I should say that the skin tone is on the natural side, because from the last generation S21, S22, and even S23, Samsung tries to whiten up the skin tone and highlight the red lips, which is a form of beautification. Now you won't see that much on the new S24. Some people may not like it, some people will do, but it's not as evident as the previous versions. Also, these two phones can shoot portrait mode on nighttime. It will not be as clear and sharp as the daytime portrait mode, but it works. Also, both phones has 1x, 2x, and 3x, a typical 24mm, 50mm, and 85mm. Looking at the selfie, it's almost identical. If there's any difference, it's too close to call. So if you're shooting a lot of selfies, then either phones will do. Now the tricky part here is the night shot, because I believe the hardware is the same for both phones. But as I was shooting the night shot, I noticed that there's more information and color boost on S24, and even the white balance is correct on the newer flagship phone. You would also notice that there's more information on S24. I would blame the shorter time on the night shots. It's almost 1 second difference every time I shoot low light images. This might be another case of Samsung downgrading the look of the older phones to make the newer phones stand out. It's just a theory like what's happening on the iPhones, but it's a consistent behavior because they have the same hardware. But seriously, if you don't nitpick on the images like what we're doing on a side-by-side test, honestly, you wouldn't probably know the difference. And all sensors on both phones can shoot night shot from the ultra-wide and 3x optical zoom.
Okay. How can I pick up the pieces?
This is the newer Samsung Galaxy S24 in 8K 30 FPS. I think the difference of the newer S24 versus S23 is the over-sharpening. It's less over-sharpened in S24. Stay tuned at the end of this video because we will do the video test on the second part of this video. Let's talk about flaring, and from the ultra-wide and telephoto, all of them manages the flaring better, and on nighttime, it's the same, just heavier halo on S24. Going for the highlights and checking this photo, if you zoom in, you would see that S24 is crushing the highlights a little bit. If we check who exposes the subject better, again, the older S23 is a bit brighter than S24, and it will expose the shadows better. But in contrary, if you look at the noise and noise reduction, although S23 will expose the shadows better, but it is noisier compared to Galaxy S24. Both phones have the same distance on close focus on the main sensor. There's no macro feature or macro mode, but you can always use the optical zoom to punch in. Checking the sharpness of the ultra-wide main sensor and telephoto, all of them has identical sharpness on the text, but you can see that S24 is not as over-sharpened as S23, and punching into the 30x digital crop, again, same level of sharpness on the text. And lastly, details. They have the same 50 megapixel sensor. Either use a 12 megapixel JPEG with pixel binning or the raw 50 megapixel, and I feel like the details are identical on both phones. So this is the image test of Samsung Galaxy S23 and S24. A little bit of difference in colors in auto mode and night shot. Now let's check the sheer performance of the sensors on video test. Let's start with the video zoom test, and on the farthest reach, there's over-sharpening on S23, but S24 is natural and a little bit soft. This is portrait video in 4K 30 FPS, almost the same look, just a little bit brighter on S23. Let's start the video stabilization test using the ultra-wide sensor in 4K 30 FPS, and both phones are doing really good, just a difference in contrast. Now we're testing the main sensor in 4K 30 FPS, and again, there's not much of a difference. The sky is just a little bit bluer on the older S23. And this is the 3x optical zoom, same value, 4K 30 FPS, and again, looks identical, same differences as the main sensor and the ultra-wide. Now, this is the selfie video recording in 4K 60 FPS, and the stabilization is pretty good too. The only difference is the older S23 is more vivid than the newer S24. This is low light video recording, again 4K 30 FPS, and I think the exposure on S23 is a little bit brighter. And as you can see on the trees, you can still see a little bit of information on Galaxy S24. And lastly, the slow motion test. The biggest difference here is Galaxy S24 can now shoot 4K at 120 FPS. There's so much details on the newer Galaxy S24. So this is the ultimate camera comparison video of Samsung Galaxy S23 and Samsung Galaxy S24. If you own last year's Galaxy S23, I don't think you need to upgrade to S24. If you're just primarily invested on the camera, sure, there are differences, but I don't think there's enough reason for you to shell out another grand for something that will perform almost the same. But if you're in dying need of the newer Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, probably on gaming, a slightly bigger battery, and 7 years of software support, also if you're vlogging you need 4K at 120 FPS for B-rolls, then Samsung Galaxy S24 is a good upgrade.